Classrooms didn't cultivate curiosity. They conditioned compliance. Bells replaced brilliance. Standardization smothered self-expression. Creativity became a casualty. This wasn't accidental. It was engineered, designed to serve the state, to supply the industry, to suppress the individual. Imported, implemented, institutionalized. They didn't want thinkers. They wanted trained, timed, testable workers. Tonight, we ask the question that changes everything. Was American education ever about learning? Or was it always about control?
Raise your glass to mysteries, cocktails and conspiracies. Dive into these histories, cocktails and conspiracies. Raise your glass to mysteries, cocktails and conspiracies. Uncover those anomalies, cocktails and conspiracies.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, whether you are tuning in across the nation or around the world. My name is Shane Skwarek, here with the Dean of Dissent, Mr. Philipps. We are your conspiracy realists, back with another episode of Cocktails and Conspiracies, where we don't tell you what to believe. We just ask the questions you're not supposed to ask. Cheers, my friend. We are back once again for another delicious episode tonight. That's a nice looking cocktail, if I do say so myself.
I was going to say, it's a fancy little drink you got there.
That is a fancy little drink we got there. Tonight's featured drink is called the Standard Issue. No flair, no freedom, just the approved measurements. Mr. Philipps, a perfectly balanced, let me bring this back up here, a perfectly balanced, no nonsense cocktail. Measured,
Sounds,
repeatable, identical every time.
it sounds very appropriate to the conversation at hand.
Doesn't that, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't an intentional maneuver by myself right here. I am bringing up my notes. For those actually really interested in the cocktail, we are going with a little Aviation American gin, a little hit of lime juice, fresh squeezed, a couple lime wedges that are in there, and a splash of simple sugar. So really trying to fancy it up a little bit here. Not going to lie.
Very, very fancy tonight. Your boy went with just a regular old G&T, no lime, because the liquor store was out of them, and I just don't keep lime in the house.
Yeah.
And while I do love some Aviation, this is not. This is, I don't even know what this is. Could be bathtub gin for all I know. Anyway.
Cheers. It
Let's
was
talk
not,
about Prussia.
This was not planned either to have the G and T's over here, or the G's and G's, or whatever, G and L's, whatever we got here. But here we are, nevertheless, same great tastes to kick things off. Tonight's a topic that you actually threw out at me, and it's one that I'm really glad you did, because I have been itching to talk about this. I rant about it constantly on Facebook and groups, and I've even got myself invested in this industry a little bit too, in part because of it. We are talking about the American education system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
that was
kind of the Prussian education system.
There we go. See, that was a nice tee up for you. You know, you're a big baseball guy. I'm teeing it up for you to pop that one out there for us. When people hear the Prussian education system, it sounds like kind of a dusty historical footnote. And in fact, when I had heard it initially too, in my research, I've heard the word tossed around a little bit, didn't really know what that was. But it's not. It's a blueprint, or it's the blueprint, as some might say. In the early 1800s, to give you some background here, Prussia had a bit of a problem. They needed obedient soldiers. They needed punctual factory workers. They needed citizens who were willing to follow orders without questioning authority. So they didn't just train people, they engineered that behavior. Students were grouped by age, not ability. Subjects became standardized, and bells dictated their movement, their attention, their silence. Sit down, stand up, speak when you're spoken to. It was not education, it was conditioning. Craziest part, though, was that it worked. So well, in fact, that other nations started to take notice, including the United States, which is why we are here today. American reformers openly admired the efficiency of the system and slowly, deliberately imported it. Once you realize that, once you realize that original intention, once you understand that, you have to start to ask yourself, if the foundation was obedience, why would the outcome, Mr. Phillips, ever be independence?
Yeah, look, I mean, you have to go back to the very beginning, like you had alluded to earlier. This comes from the 1800s, comes from Prussia, which, by the way, I'm not a smart person, been talking about that for over a year in this podcast. I had to look up Prussia because I remember, like, when I think of Prussia, I think of like Prussian soldiers, but I never could. I'm like, where is Prussia? Like, what was Prussia? Well, Prussia doesn't exist anymore.
They've
Prussia
got a
was
mall.
kingdom
They've got a mall out in Pennsylvania,
King of Prussia.
right?
There you
King of
go,
Prussia Mall. There
Pennsylvania.
you go.
That is very true. Well, besides the mall, it was a territory. It was a kingdom that disbanded post World War One. It consisted of mostly Germany and I want to say Poland. I could be wrong on that. I believe it was Germany and Poland. In any event, though, it really goes back to the defeat of the Prussians by the Napoleonic army, by Napoleon. They suffered an absolutely crushing defeat. And what was this guy's name? Frederick William III, who was the ruler of Prussia at that time, was so distraught that, to your point, as you mentioned earlier, he said, we've got to turn this around. And that's when, with the idea of building, if you will, soldiers and upstanding citizens and regimented folks that could run society, that's where this all comes from. So it's, once you kind of get later on, and we'll talk about all the ins and outs of it, we're talking early 1800s here. This isn't really truly adopted in the U.S. until the 1840s and not full-fledged until 1890. But is it a symptom of the system, or was the system implemented to get that outcome? And that's the question at hand, my friend.
You know, with most things, I think the intentions are always pure, right? In this case, standardization is being sold as fairness, right? If we give the same curriculum, we give the same tests, we can have the same expectations for people because we're hand holding you through it. We see that across the board. We see that in business. We see that in education. We see that in every model in today's society. But fairness isn't necessarily the same thing as freedom. When you start to standardize education, you're not just simplifying learning, you're simplifying people. You're changing the way people think or I don't want to use the word learn again, but the way they learn, right? Kids learn to wait for instructions, to chase correct answers instead of original ideas, to fear being wrong more than being curious. And that's not how humans naturally learn. That's not how that's how systems manage populations. The best example of that I could think of is when your kids are really young. What are they doing the entire time, right? They're making mistakes. They're generally not listening. That's why you're always yelling at them for that. But they always tell you that the best time for kids to pick up anything is those early years. Their brains are like a sponge, right? They can learn multiple languages. Like they teach kids sign languages or two languages now at a very early age because they can grasp it like that. Why is that, though? Is that because the brain is really developing, which of course it is, we know that scientific fact, or is it because at that point there is no conditioning there? Controllable people don't challenge the system.
Sure.
Especially the system that trained them in the first place. And over time, that lesson starts to sink in for people, not consciously, conditionally. We see that across the board in science, in medicine, in academia. When you challenge something, you're ridiculed, right? Science is the biggest factor for that. How often do you have a scientist that comes up with a crazy idea or an invention and they're not truly appreciated until they're gone because what they're challenging breaks the societal norms? We have built a podcast of over 30,000 followers right here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the internet right here, which I'm sure you all have already liked and subscribed. We have built this foundation on asking these questions, the very questions that if you ask out there in public, people are going to ridicule you, because it is not the questions that they were asked, or I'm sorry, it was not the answers that they were given when they were in school, which follows a straight and narrow line. And so is this really about education, our systems, or behavior management?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a really good point. When I was doing research this, and like you, when I was doing research this, I could speak. When I was doing research for this episode, and it was one of those things that I was aware of, but I was very, very surface level aware of, oh yeah, like our education system comes from the Prussian education system, and it's really just about building soldiers and compliant citizens. And that was just kind of a talking point that I would regurgitate, but I didn't really know the history of it or really what it meant. Like, I couldn't really back it up. And so, upon doing the research, Horace Mann, who kind of at that point in time, this was in the early 1800s, was kind of running the education system in Massachusetts, visited Prussia, and he was influenced by what he saw. And so he kind of brings that back, and he's like the salesman, so to speak, and he was just really enamored with it. And so he's the one that sells Massachusetts. That was the first state to really adopt this, and it didn't catch on full-fledged right away. There were it was kind of tailored and staggered, and it wasn't like uniforms and bells and a curriculum and age, separated by age all at once. It was little things that happened over a period of time to then emulate the Prussian education system. But in the research that I did on Horace Mann, there was nothing, I guess, what's the word? Nothing, oh God, I'm struggling here. Negative about the guy, or I should say,
Malicious,
conspicuous.
Malicious.
Okay.
Okay.
There didn't appear to be malicious intent. It was that he found this to be just a terrific way of educating people, and I found myself asking the same question. Well, why not? Why wouldn't we educate this people way? But I'm conditioned because that's the way that I was educated, right? And so, when you raise that question, is it the best way to educate people? I don't know. I know that everybody learns differently, and so grouping everyone together to learn in one specific way, well, that in and of itself should probably be enough to answer that question with a no, because there are probably a lot of kids that don't learn the way that they're conditioned to learn, and that's why we see some struggles in just their ability to learn in behavior and mental health and things of that nature. It's just a whole form of questions. Mauricio, you're gonna have to bleep me a lot tonight. I feel like being myself.
Maybe I should be tagging that one right there. I tagged something the other day, and he's like, "What am I looking for?" I was really late on my tag. The question that we always come back to whenever we have a conspiracy topic is who actually benefits from everyone thinking the same way. Let's fast forward a little bit, and we're going to come back here because there's some points that you mentioned that I really want to touch on that I think are important, but we'll tackle that in the realist segment of the show. You do everything right, you follow the rules, you graduate, then you're handed a bill, right? Student loan debt isn't just financial, it's psychological. Debt makes people very risk averse. It discourages rebellion. It turns stability into survival. When you owe money, you don't quit the job you hate. You don't challenge authority. You don't take risks because responsibility now comes with like a leash around you. It's funny because I completely separate from you bringing this up earlier today, I got in a discussion on Twitter with somebody and changed his mind about unpaid internships. And I'll tell you why in a minute. You don't need chains when you have contracts. You don't need force when people are willing to self-police themselves. Debt doesn't keep people working. It keeps them compliant. And the story that happened on Twitter today is really talking about, I'm not going to mention the media outlet's name because they've been slammed all over social media, but a local sports outlet that makes probably about $10 million a year was hiring for unpaid interns. And the Twitter world was just torching this company and other companies like it that are in the media world that are doing unpaid internships. And I used to believe that along the same course of action, right? That you should never take an unpaid internship. I would have never taken it when I was coming out of college. I always told people around me, there's no way. I would never work for no money. My skill set was very different though, because I taught myself everything I knew. When I was going through college, I wasn't learning anything in so much as I was just validating what I learned. I did what I did for my career today as a hobby. So an internship wasn't beneficial to me. But what you often see is people will go through school and then they'll end up with a job that has nothing to do with the schooling that they took. It has nothing to do with something they enjoy. And when you talk to them about that, it's like, well, why are you in this industry? It's like, I can't do the thing I want. Well, why is that? Well, out of college, what do the entry level jobs look like, right? They're generally going to be door-to-door sales types things, entry level like office work, things that don't require much knowledge about anything that you can just kind of be thrown into. And 50% of you will fall off out of the job very quickly. 50% of you might stick around a little bit longer. And of that 50%, another 70% will fall off after 2 years. What ends up happening though is when you leave college and you enter this workforce and you take one of those types of jobs and you start to build your life as you get older, all of these things that we just talked about, the debt, the responsibilities, the financial obligations as you look to get a mortgage and have a home or rent a place, even have a family, pay for your family's education, have a spouse, get a car. You now get tied into all this debt. And that job that you took because you were just trying to make ends meet, because you had no experience to do anything else, all of a sudden becomes your career because you have no other choice. Versus, and the argument I was making with the unpaid internship is, if you take that jump and sacrifice a little bit of your time to gain that little bit of knowledge, all of a sudden you don't need to go take that entry level job because you have the experience. And companies are risk averse as well. They don't want to commit 6-12 months to train somebody that might still quit the job. They're still paying you to be there and they're not getting the work done. So they need two people to be basically doing it. It costs a lot of money to train somebody, right? That's why they're looking for people with experience. And shockingly on the internet, the person responded back to me like, you completely changed my perspective. I really appreciated having this conversation. Young 20-something-year-old person too. Mind-blowing this happened. But that's where I think the debt factor comes into play right here. In thinking this through, a lot of the decisions I made were very much tied to my skill set. And when I quit my job, I tell this story all the time in another life, in my business life. It took me 6 months. Every single day I got on the train. I took it 2.5 hours into the city, 2.5 hours home from New York City. And I thought for every minute of 2.5 hours, so I was 13 hours away from home when I was coming home and running a business. I'm quitting my job today for 6 straight months until I finally muster the courage to do that. And my biggest concern was the finances. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a family. I didn't have anything to do, but I did have my skill set. And I was able to take that risk because I wasn't tied to a job. I wasn't tied to finances. I didn't really care. It was the creativity aspect of it for me. A lot of my education has always been about doing things. That's how I learn. I tell people all the time, like, I never did homework. And in high school or in college, I never did homework. I didn't take notes either. I just watched and I did things, right? That's the way I learned. Whether that was taught, whether it was something I just accumulated early on, I don't know. But I find that when you pedal people through these systems and they start to feel trapped, they lose that willingness to even just do what's right. Is that intentional? Again, like, I'm going to keep bringing up the same question, or is it just circumstantial of the situation? And I've talked a lot. I'll give you the floor here.
Well, this actually is not an avenue that I plan to go at all in the slightest bit, and I will unfortunately self-censor a little bit because we want those views, because we want to continue to be able to do this. But you just mentioned something about, do people do things? What did you just say? Something about doing things or do things even if they're not right?
Do you make decisions? Do you make the best decision for yourself or do you not make that because of now I'm screwing myself up. The gin's hitting hard tonight, baby. Do you not take those risks because it's intentional or because it's circumstantial? Because you actively don't want to because you weighed the risk, or because you have no other choice? You can't take that risk because of the potential fallout of it.
And I wish I could rewind my brain, because you also said something else about, and maybe I misunderstood it, but I'm gonna say what I want to say anyway. But the conditioning and about doing what's popular, in a sense, right?
Sure. Doing what you're supposed to.
We've talked about this. Correct. We've talked about this many times in Code 2020.
Yep.
A lot of people, and everybody, look, if you were a listener, an avid listener, watcher of this show, you know what we're talking about when we say 2020.
Their whole
It's a little
episode
bit
with
of a
Matthew
code word,
Scow on
right?
it. Yep. There you
Exactly, right? So if you look at 2020, and granted, in the very beginning, it was mixed, right? You had many different people that felt many different ways about it. As we progressed through that year, and then the additional 2 years that we all suffered with everything that came with that, the overwhelming majority of most people were against what the government was imposing on us. But what did they do? They continued to comply. Why did they continue to comply? Is it because they were conditioned? Is it because they were afraid? Right? And can we tie those behaviors back to the conditioning in the US and then bring it all the way back to the Prussian education system? That's a question that I pose you, my friend.
You know what? That is a perfect question, because like yourself, I was very avidly vocal at points. And when people were being asked and forced to do specific things, I outright said, don't do them. What is the worst that is going to happen? You're going to lose your job. And it's very easy for me to say because I make my own money. But I was also putting myself out there because people are paying me that money. They're choosing to work with me or not work with me. And I'm not making my opinions very quiet. Again, we have a 30,000 subscriber count on YouTube right now. Thank you, everybody, by the way. Keep liking and sharing with your friends, subscribing, so on and so forth. My feelings aren't hidden, right? If you follow me on any social media channel, if you find this podcast, which everyone knows that I do, that I work with, you know what those feelings are. They're very separate from business, but I was putting my name and my livelihood out there as well in a slightly different way. Having said that, though, I still steered my own destiny, and we had a lot of people, mutual friends and not so much, that would say that kind of stuff to me. My whole perspective of it is, and I say this to entrepreneurs all the time too, is like, this is going to be a slight diversion here, but I promise there's a point. I tell entrepreneurs that when you build a business, right? Well, the biggest thing people do when they try to build a business, they try to make it a side hustle, even if it's something they love, something they know they can do too good at, and they do it as a side hustle. And the problem is the people you communicate with and the people that you're going to sell your product to are going to be off hours. And they're also going to be side hustlers too, especially if you're in a service business. So they're always going to be looking for discounts. You're never going to be able to fully commit because you're going to be working a full-time job. And as much as you think you're Superman, you're not. You're going to come home. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be tired. You're not going to be fully focused. And you're never going to be able to build that business. And I've said to somebody very recently, quit your job, dedicate it to this, build your business, bet on yourself. What is the worst that can happen? You're going to go back and take that job that you quit already? You can always go back, or you can get another job. You already say you don't like the job. You can find another job. Again, I know it's easier said than done, but there's a mental blockage within that where people are so mortified of the idea of being locked into finances, right? I don't think that's necessarily, and this is why, branching it all back together, I don't think that's necessarily unintentional by the implementation of the education system. There is a life skills gap. You go through 12 years of schooling, structured. I'm not counting kindergartens and pre-Ks and all that stuff. Thousands of hours. And yet most people graduate without knowing how to do their taxes or how taxes even work, how credit works, how you can maintain a good credit score or even boost it up from a 500 to an 800 in 6 months, how contracts work, what you're actually doing when you're signing that piece of paper, if you're just clicking right to the end and just scribbling your signature, how to negotiate your pay, how to even have the confidence to ask for a raise or find out what other people are making, how to weigh your job, or how to build wealth, how to save, what a 401k is, what a Roth IRA is, how the finance work. I remember, I'm 40 now. This was in probably my 30s or right afterwards. I had a friend that asked another friend. They bought Devils season tickets together, and the one friend said, "Yeah, just write me a check for your balance, right?" And he sat there and he looked at checks, and he's like, "I've never written one before in my entire life." And he was 30 years old, never wrote a check in his entire life. And like, these are things I knew. I happened to take an elective accounting course in high school because I was interested in math, and so I knew basic accounting. Right. Like, so I had a concept of that, but like your food classes where you learn to cook were elective classes. Your accounting classes were elective. All of these life skills related classes are electives. You learn history 15 times in 15 different ways, which again, always written by the winner, right? You learn all the same subjects in so many different ways that a lot of the times people ask jokingly, but semi-seriously, when am I going to apply this in my normal life? I'm not saying there's a downside to knowing that stuff. It is important to know that stuff, of course, but I don't think this is an oversight, right? I think this is a designed choice. Somebody who understands money also understands power. Someone who understands systems can escape them. That is why you have somebody that can become an entrepreneur, or somebody that can work from home and adjust their own schedule. That can yourself. You've turned down senior level positions, right? Most people would say you're out of your mind, but you understand how they work. You understand that the pay and the responsibility don't equate, and that all of a sudden expectations are completely different, and your responsibilities are so much more, and you're actually getting compensated less. Most people don't get that because they're told that the title on your piece of paper means more than anything else. Schools, the education system as it is today, are preparing you to function within the system. It's not preparing you to understand the way it works. Compliance over competence, right? Memorization over mastery. When you take tests, all you did was cram. That's why I never studied. I knew this stuff, right? I paid attention. I did it. I knew it. I never had to study because of that. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone's that same way. I'm not suggesting that I'm better than anybody else. It was just something that I gravitated towards. I latched onto early on. Permission over autonomy. You couldn't even go to the bathroom without asking permission. Again, I understand there's structure involved in that. Tying that all together, I think that is what creates the situation you were talking about back in 2020 and many other times throughout history and many other facets. Again, you could take any fact of science, of sports banter, of pro wrestling arguments. People like to regurgitate what they can hear. Go on a Twitter thread, right? Go on an Instagram post and something happens. Your favorite sports team just signed blah, blah, blah player or drafted blah, blah, blah player. You can literally see the first 30 comments is somebody tell me why I should be excited about this, because they don't know how to formulate an opinion on it. And then the popular opinion is always the one. Fire this coach. Oh, this actor's terrible. This movie is. How many movies have you, well, you're not a big movie guy, but how many movies have you watched that you absolutely love that were tanked in the box office or the ratings were awful, but you love them? And you didn't watch it for years because the movie was said it was supposed to be so bad. Conversely, how many times has there been a movie that's been so hyped up and everyone loves it, or a TV series? Stranger Things, for example, you were talking about the other day, even today. Everyone loves Stranger Things. I don't care for it. I hated Game of Thrones. I thought The Sopranos was awful. I thought Breaking Bad was one of the most boring, and I watched it from start to finish, one of the most boring TV shows of all time. But people like these things because they're told to like them, right? Memorization over mastery, compliance over competence, permission over autonomy. You're conditioned to believe these things sometimes. And when it happens on and on and on and on again throughout your life, we've talked about this on the show. This has been a recurring theme. You now feel like a sense of defeat, I guess, when everything that you know, your livelihood, your opinions on things have been structured over something that might not actually be true. Disclosure is a perfect example of that. Why do they say that we can't handle disclosure? Because it changes everything you know. And not everybody now is capable of changing their minds and just saying like, hey, you know what? I'll use a football analogy again. Don't know why. It's big on my mind right now. They used to call Matt Ryan Matty Ice. Eli Manning was notorious for this too. They can throw a pick, an interception. They can go back on the field like it never happened. And they always said that's a super skill because people get in their own heads about it. This fear consumes them. And then you're going to throw another pick and another pick. Players like that always thrived. Same example here is what I'm trying to say is you have to be able to stop, full stop on everything you know and say, you know what? I'm going to forget about that. I'm changing my perspective because new information changes the way I thought before. We leave people so unprepared for real life after all of these years of education, and then we ask them to pay for more of it to learn the same classes over and over again. You never teach them a life skill. You never teach them a tangible skill. Again, I went to 4 years of college. I was walking into classes that were 5 hours a week. I would walk in and take the test. I never sat down in the class. And in the 15 minutes before the test, I would teach everybody that was in my like tabled group how to do the test. It's like, oh, it's easy. Bup, 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 bup. And I'd walk out. And my teachers knew. I told them, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to do any of the assignments. I'm not going to do the homework. I know all this stuff. I did this stuff in high school. I took exams with my high school notes. I took senior level courses for a master's program, right? They were my electives my senior year. They were master's level courses. I was using my high school junior year notes. Greatest teacher, Mr. Kvalek, gave me the book, said, you lost this book, give me $30. You're going to use this in your future. He was so right on that. People thinking outside the education system. Literally regurgitating, I was paying for the same thing to get a piece of paper that, by the way, to this day, nobody's ever asked me to see in my entire life. I could have made it all up. And I worked for myself. I didn't even need the damn thing. I inherited how many thousands of dollars worth of debt for something I never used my entire life.
You're right. I know people that have
Rant
made it
over.
up. Not you, but I know people who have made it
Yeah,
up and
right.
put it on a resume, and their
Nobody
job
checks.
never asked for it.
Nobody
Nobody
checks.
checks.
Nobody checks.
Nobody checks.
Which tells you everything you need to know about education. Rant
So
over.
now look, you are, first and foremost, I'm going to start with, you have the worst taste in television out of anybody I've ever met in my life. So
Untrue. I
how
watch
dare you criticize Stranger Things or The Sopranos, okay? Get out of here. Secondly, getting back to the important stuff, you're a very intelligent guy, right? And I was very similar to you in that, well, I didn't have a specialty, right? By the time you were in high school, you kind of knew what you wanted to do in regards to the computer world, right? It was something that was a hobby of yours. You were really interested in it. I didn't have that path, but like you, I never studied. I never took a note. I just paid attention in class. And I'll tell you what, the things that I was interested in, science, history, the things that I love, that stuff came like a piece of cake because all I did was listen because I was interested in learning about those things. And I would go and I would take that test and it was a piece of cake, right? Not everybody's like that, right? Like they're like, I'm like I have 3 children, right? My son is just like me in that regard, right? He doesn't take notes, doesn't study, straight A's, high honor roll, every single marking period. And he's lucky in that sense. My daughters, who were not dumb by any stretch of the imagination, they don't have that ability. They don't have that skill, if you want to call it that. And so what's the alternative solution, right? So there's this kind of, we're talking about a more, not having to go through the rigid school system like we did, and or actually kind of going through that school system but not participating in it like everybody else and still being successful within that system, and then again outside of that system in our adult lives and our careers. But for the people that don't have those same skill sets, those same abilities, and can't do that, what is the alternative solution there?
I think that's a really good question. I think that is why our education system exists as it does. And I have not been a stranger to absolutely shredding education regularly on all social platforms. And I often get comments back like, oh, I have plenty of friends that are teachers. I have family members that work on the school system, lots of them, including my own wife. So it's not that. I don't blame the people. I always get, oh, you hate teachers, blah, blah, blah. You hate kids, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not the case at all. I think the entire system is flawed. And I think throwing more money at the people in the system isn't going to fix it. It actually makes it worse because there's no repercussions for failing your students, right? And I don't mean failing them on a test. I mean failing them in what they're learning. Programs that are implemented so no child left behind. You're just passing people to push them through a system to push them into colleges. I understand the purpose, right? When you run a successful business, and this is my forte, I tell every business, the first thing I do when I walk into a business, especially as a consultant, to figure out what's wrong, is I ask them what their standards and procedures are. You need to be able to standardize your business to measure your employees and your work output across the board. It does not matter what business you are in, what niche, what you do, you need to have these things. It should be so refined to the letter that if you stepped away from that business, everybody can operate flawlessly. Of course, that never happens. Nothing's perfect, but that's the way it should be. Multi-million-dollar corporations, billion-dollar corporations, that is what they are doing. They are no different. Watch anything with Marcos Lemonis, The Prophet, The Fixer, anything else. Just watch him. He does the exact same thing in every business he goes in. He says it. The only difference between a business making no money and a business making millions of dollars is the process. And as long as you put the process in place, the right people and so forth. When you look at schools and education, There are so many children, and there's obviously not enough staff, and there's not enough capacity to give everyone individualized attention. There are children that can't learn, like you, myself. I'm sorry, you and myself. Yeah, you and myself, and your son, and like some others. There are people that really need to double down and focus. I think the problem is, though, is that we're not paying attention. And this is a generalization. I know that there's some people out there. I personally have had some great teachers. I got very lucky in a lot of situations in my life that I had great teachers that recognized these things. And what they would do is they would amend curriculum. Those programming teachers I was talking about, I had another teacher, another shout out, I'll give her Miss Raynone out there, who knew that myself and friend of the show, Steve Soletto, he'll be a guest in here to talk about 5G one day if he gets over his fear of public speaking here. We were so far in advance of the web design class that we were taking that she let us run wild and do whatever we want and got us tied into college credits that she went to the county college for and negotiated to get us that. Then she talked to the school, like the board of the school, to create a new class so we can be in that same classroom with the following semester or year or whatever it was, and do something even more advanced and empower us to do that kind of stuff. That is all I would ask as a parent, as a person that looks at the education system is, I want a teacher like that. I want more teachers like that. I don't want teachers that are going through the motions, and perhaps you all come out of college like that and people get watered down. But when you see that somebody excels, don't hold them back and put them on the same level as somebody that's struggling. We have all these programs in place now where kids that are just not good behaviorally or trying to really walk carefully on some of the lines here, they're just not as intelligent, right? We're so obsessed with the idea of putting everyone on an equal playing field. If you have a developmental disability, if you have any sort of special needs, we're dumping them in classrooms with quote unquote normal kids. Why? You're treating them worse because you're not acknowledging. When I was growing up and when you were growing up, they were separated. And I'm from a social perspective, that does suck. But I remember my father in his post-career worked at a special ed school that was only kids with special needs. They didn't sit there and learn freaking 5 years worth of science and cutting open a frog. Like, they didn't need to learn that crap. That wasn't irrelevant. What they did is they had the kids in the school, many of them with like Down syndrome or weren't going to be able to develop past, a 20-year-old's brain or an 18-year-old's brain, whatever it was, 16-year-old's brain. They were teaching them how to cook. They would make the lunch in the school every day. They had a ShopRite that sponsored the school. It was a fully functioning ShopRite that the public can come into, that the school ran. They had these kids going in there running ShopRite. And when they graduated out of the school, they'd go work at local grocery stores. It was a direct tie-in. They set these kids up with life skills, real things to move them on, because they acknowledged the fact that they had deficiencies in certain areas of their lives. They weren't going to be locked in a basement somewhere. They were giving them skills so they could succeed outside of that. With the education system, we don't do that at all under any circumstance. And I can speak to this from my son's perspective, who was doing third grade work, like reading, writing, and math in preschool. And he had a couple of good teachers along the way that would give him extra work, but like there's no pathway for him to do more than that. And so what we had to do as parents, again, first world problems, I guess, was curtail a lot of his learning. This kid could be building rockets right now, but we had to stop him so that he can learn to write his colors down. Like, he didn't know how to do that in 3 languages when he was 2.5 years old. That is my issue, right? Is we take all of these kids and we dump them in because it's easy and it's convenient. And we're stifling these minds. How many people do you know that got straight A's in school and are idiots now? Or they just didn't, you thought in school, like, this person's going to be a millionaire, and yet they're working some menial job or maybe living in poverty, maybe just living paycheck to paycheck. You're like, what happened? Like, you were brilliant, but somewhere along the line you got squashed.
I thought I was going to be the president.
Well, there you
I
go.
was going to be the president.
There's
if
no
you'd asked
way.
me when I was 6, 7 years old, I was going to be the president of the United States of America, and there was nothing and nobody that could stop me. And I'm sure that sentence was grammatically incorrect, and you can see why I'm not. But I get what you're saying. No,
Yeah,
look, I totally get what you're saying. I want to, you kind of sparked another thought in my mind when you were talking about your father working at that school and what they did for those kids, and they were cooking and working at the ShopRite, which is awesome. And that kind of ties into something that we talked about earlier, right? I was talking about those people that don't have the ability to just go in and ace a test because all they did was listen and that's how they learned. When I said, what's the alternative solution, right, for those kids that don't have those abilities, I guess I'm pigeonholing them to the system that they're in.
Yep.
And I guess
100%.
maybe the whole point of this conversation is the fact that the system in and of itself is wrong and it's broken and it shouldn't be that way, right?
Destroyed. It's a mess.
And it is, right? And look, it's a deeper mess, and I think you're thinking about it in maybe a bit of a different way than I am. And I'll do my best to explain. And it's difficult, and it is you kind of walk that line between, well, everybody needs some level of education, right?
100% agree.
And at what point does that education branch off into other things and or stop the traditional terms of education? When I say traditional, I'm talking about, your English, your math, your science, your history, right? I'm just talking about those main four. Let's say, for example, my 11-year-old right now wants to be, and she doesn't, I'm just making this up. Let's say she wants to be a hairdresser, okay? And she knows right now she wants to be a hairdresser. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of her specifically continuing? Now she's in 5th grade now, so she's got to go through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's 6 more years of school. What's the purpose of her learning 6 more years of history? What is the purpose of her learning 6 more years of history that she will never, ever use in her life? And now granted, I'm not saying that you should be taught to cut hair now at the age of 11. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you have a kid who, and I'm using that as a very specific example. If you have a kid that's really into art, right? He's into the arts or she's into the arts, whether that be music or painting or whatever it might be. Why are we pigeonholing these kids and locking them into this rigid system of you must do these things that we tell you to do? And you have to wake up every day. You have to go to that school early. You have to be miserable. You have to be locked in a room for 6 hours, right? For what? For what? Why are we doing that, right? And I think that's where that stifling of individualism and creativity and, all these negative connotations that come along with the system, the education system that the Prussians and that we have then built, I think that's where that kind of comes into play. And it's not perfect because, like I said, an 11-year-old shouldn't be taught to cut hair. That's not what I'm saying. But there's got to be a better solution, no? There needs to be a different path.
That's where things have started to happen a little bit. Models like the alpha schools have started to show up. They're basically 2-hour school days.
Them a lot.
I talk about them a lot. I'm obsessed with them. There's nothing up or where we are. I've tried to inquire with some of them to open them myself. They're 2-hour school days. They are mastery-based learning, self-paced education. Students always outperform traditional schools. So let that sit for a minute. You will get somebody that is the age of 5 in the same room as the age of somebody that's 15. They are working on all of the same curriculums and taking all of the same standardized tests as somebody that's going to a standard school year. They're doing it in 2 hours a day. By the end of each year, they're building businesses in most cases, like legal businesses. Like that is what their goal. They're being taught very practical life schools. If kids can learn more in 2 hours than in 6 or 7, what are they doing in school all day? Right?
Right.
If education is
That's a
really
great
about
point.
learning, this model would be everywhere. But school also functions as child storage, as workforce conditioning, behavioral training. It makes sense why it threatens the system. It exposes the lie of what it's there for. To your question, I think there is validity in the idea that your elementary years should be hyper-focused on learning a little bit of everything. Again, I go back to the idea that these brains are like sponges. For my kids, for my youngest, who is obsessed with learning, he gets like engineering books. Like all the books he gets are, it's called like, whatever the topic is for curious kids. They are all for like middle school level kids. He is forced to read them every single day and he loves them. And he will come down here and tell me why Google got its name because a Googleplex is the largest number ever known. Oh, I had no idea about that. He'll tell you the history of numbers. He'll tell you about different engineering feats and planets and things like that. These are things that he's interested in as he's reading all these books. My daughter has changed her mind probably like yours 100 times on what she wants to be when she grows up. We don't expect them to walk away from that. But this is the time in those early years, the elementary years, for them to go from K to 8 and learn everything. Learn about the history. Learn. You don't need to talk about the slangs and the brutality of it. That stuff is just manipulation to make people think that there's all these same problems going on right now, and to condition them in a different way, to hate certain groups of people and to feel guilty, have this guilt because they're certain, because they were born a certain way. Ridiculous, pointless, waste of time. Topic for a different day. I think by the time you hit those high school years and like the junior high school years, that should be the time of like focus. Like now we should be teaching these kids life skills. Learn to do your taxes, learn about investing, learn about cooking, cleaning, and living on your own. When you go to college, you're supposed to live on your own. That doesn't really work like that anymore. Now it just becomes a piggy bank for parents to pay for DoorDash, right? But if you use those high school years to now give them practical hands-on experience and allow them to start trying different things. I remember career days. Like I went around with like a realtor once just because I picked like a random career. I was like, this is pretty interesting. Not something I think I'd do as a career, but I remember being able to do that. I've never heard of that even since. I didn't hear about it before, didn't hear about it after. I think they just tried it one year when we were in high school. But like, why would you not be trying that stuff? Why would you not be trying to get local businesses to come in and do workshops or to take these kids in? You know, these kids are all getting jobs anyway by the time they turn 15, 16, because they're getting their working papers, 14 in some cases. Work with the local businesses and get them involved in doing stuff more than just, you know, getting somebody coffee. Goes back to the internship question that we talked about earlier, and my rant on Twitter is, if you're just bringing these people in and having them get coffee, it's a waste of everybody's time. But if you're using them to let them just absorb knowledge, there is so much more value in being able to spend 5 hours, even just 5 hours, watching somebody else work than it is to do 4 years of school. Because then you can understand what a day is like. You can understand how things don't go as planned. You can see how they work. You can see how they problem solve. You can't read that. You can't teach that. That's why experience always trumps education across the board, right?
Sure.
That's the way, if I was in charge of education, that's the way I would structure it, is those high school, junior high school years, that like 9 to 12, even probably 7 or 8, honestly, depending. You know, districts are all kind of set up a little funky depending on where you are. But even that 7, 8 to a degree is like, these are the years you shouldn't be learning like your 3rd year of another language. Who cares? If you're interested in languages, great. Why the hell are you making me learn 3 or 4 different languages and then doing 3 years and then having to redo them again in college? It's for money. That's all it's for.
They do it worse now too. They
What's
do
that?
it worse now too.
Terrible.
So just in terms of language, and I granted this isn't the crux of what we're talking about here. Well, and I can only speak for the Toms River School District because that's where my kids go. But my son is in 8th grade, right? He's in his last year of middle school. Dude, they get Spanish one semester. One semester. That's it. What are you really learning, right? If you were, granted, and I know. We're having a very lengthy discussion about how rigid or not rigid education should be. But if you really want somebody to learn a language, what are they learning by taking a grand total of 3 semesters of a language in 3 years?
Right.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's
completely pointless. It's completely worthless. It's so dumb.
And that's
so dumb.
And again, this isn't a knock on the educators themselves, because I think most of them will agree
No,
that they're very hamstrung. Like, again, you come out of school with all these ideas and all this excitement. By the time you're reaching retirement, you want to get the hell out of there because you're just locked in to do what you're told to do and read a crappy curriculum and try to make it fun. At the end of the day, you got to scrape a lot of that stuff. You should be life skills only, and then direct people to nobody talks about, it's changing a little bit now, but nobody talks about vocations and plumbers and electricians. And it's looked at as a crap job, which in some cases you're dealing in crap, but those people are making 6 figures right out of the gate. When I work with them in business, most of them don't know how to run a business. They're making 6 figures and they don't know their ass from their elbow in business. They're hemorrhaging money. They're paying for things they don't need to pay for. They'd be making twice as much money by just cleaning that stuff up. They don't know how to do any of that stuff, which is why people like me are in business, right? So maybe shooting myself in the foot, but like there's so much potential to set people off on the right track and not marry them to this nonsense, and to be able to enjoy those youthful years in the same way by just exploring, experimenting, and being able to do A little bit of anything, a little bit of everything. You know, that's what that's for. Once you settle down and have a family, it's not easy. You can't do that stuff. You can. I take that back.
No.
You can do anything you want. There's no time.
Sure.
An old quote. Best time to start to yesterday, the second best time is today. Start if you have a job or if you have a wish or a dream or an idea of something you want to do, by all means, go ahead and start it. But it's a whole lot harder to do that now. And I think that is partially intentional. I think it's partially laziness. It's easy to do that. I think it is a whole lot of nepotism and embezzlement because you see that constantly in all layers of government, especially in school districts. I mean, look at these teacher unions that are just embezzling money hand over foot, and then they're political activists for specific parties. You see it in hiring processes where all of a sudden somebody's neighbor is going to get hired for a job if they're not qualified for, and the district hemorrhages money every year. When their friend needs a $50,000 raise, they get it. But when a teacher or a secretary needs about $5,000, they can't. There's no room in the budget. We need to buy a new ream of paper. We can't afford the $30, but we have the 50 grand to give this guy who's already making 250, who's there one day a week. So I digress. I'm going on a lot of rants today, but this is a topic I'm passionate about.
Rant boy. The rant boy Rue.
The king of the rants.
I think for me, it comes down to the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that, and you might disagree with this because I know you're very passionate about putting in the work, right? But again, you come from a different perspective because you're working with a lot of small businesses and business owners. And if you want that business to be successful, you have to put in those hours. You have to put in that. You have to be obsessed with it, right? And I don't disagree with that. But most people are not business owners, right? Most people are the pen and paper pushers. Most people are, and granted, their jobs are necessary. Some aren't. But 99% of people out there are not the business owner. And so, look, I'll use myself as an example, right? In a prior job, I was a project manager for a very large big box retail store that no longer exists. Actually, I think they are kind of back.
Yep. Thank you, Marcus Lemonis.
Yeah, there you go. But where I'm going with this is it was a 10-hour workday. Okay. It was Monday through Friday when I was in the corporate office. It was a 10-hour workday. And I had come from the field. I had worked in the stores prior to getting into the corporate office. And when we were in the stores, there were things to do at just about any second of the day, right? It's a lot of work to run a retail store, and everybody's involved and everybody's very busy. Once I got to the corporate office, what I need to tell you, an overwhelming majority of the time, I sat there and stared at my computer screen because there was nothing to do. I am not kidding. I would just get up and go for a 20-minute, half-hour walk around the corporate campus because I wanted to blow my brains out because there was nothing to do, right? And so I think that a lot of time is wasted. I think people waste a lot of time at their jobs doing something or doing nothing because we shouldn't be working 10 8-hour work days. Again, if you own a business, I know that's a different story. Most people don't. And then when you bring that back to kids, right? And I think you talked about, was it the alpha model? And these kids go to school for 2 hours. For me, that's the key, right? Because if you could free kids up, right? Even if in that 2-hour period of time, and of course, you're not going to cover every single subject every single day.
They do,
I'm
though.
sure those models
They
different.
do.
Do they really?
Because
Okay,
you're
well,
not
that's pretty cool.
dealing with the nonsense. Like for
they're cutting out
my
the fat.
son, right? I'll use his name, Victor. I don't really care. But so Victor, when he was very early on, young, when he was blitzing, I mean, he was taking my daughter's curriculum books home that we were getting from the school and doing them in a week, teaching himself all this stuff. So we signed him up for programs online, like little applications, and he'd sit there and he'd learn the stuff and play it, but he'd cover a full grades level of education in an hour. Because you're not just banging these kids over the head with the repetition and the nonsense ways to, like, here's the trick on how you memorize it, all these complicated ways to do math.
Right.
You're just teaching them what they need to know. Like, again, you talked about it before, why do we need 6 years of history? What did you actually learn? Can you regurgitate half of that stuff that you learned in those classes? Of course not. Nobody can.
And even me, as
memorize.
somebody who loves history, I love history, and I couldn't regurgitate all of that because it's not possible.
Right, you're memorizing dates and locations and places. It's completely pointless. And I understand the importance of understanding what happened. And that's all the alpha school model is really built around a lot. It's really STEM stuff primarily, right? Science, technology, engineering type stuff, math. But you're teaching the focus, you're teaching how to do it, and then you're putting it to practical application. the time after the school is generally spent on projects. So it's not like you're just going home and sitting on a video game. You're working on something. It's 2 hours of hyper-focused education where you're learning at your own pace. You're either going faster or slower. And then the rest of your day, you're working on a project, you're building something. Like the old diorama days, right? It's practical application, not sitting at a desk doing nothing.
Right.
Continue your point.
No, no, but I Bill, you kind of prove my point, right? Like it's, you know, as you mentioned, and I don't remember what the stats were, but this alpha model, the kids outperformed the standard model by, it sounded like a pretty large margin.
Every single time.
So, right. And so that kind of just harkens back to why are we locking these kids in a building for 6 hours a day and just beating the crap out of them with senseless, useless stuff that they're never gonna use.
Well, I think it
Never
goes
gonna
back to the idea that because it's been going on and perpetuated for so long, you're sitting in
That's
an
part
office
of it.
for 8 hours a day doing
Sure.
absolutely nothing. So now your kids have to sit somewhere for 8 hours a day to do absolutely nothing because you still have to be there. Whereas if we structured this differently from the beginning, I mean, we wonder why sometimes like technology is so stifled or civilization feels like it went through this boom period and then stopped and everything has been granted, again, technology rapidly increases every day, but like we aren't seeing huge leaps in innovation like we did in the past. But if people are sitting around in an office for 8 hours a day doing absolutely nothing except for twiddling their thumbs and have no energy or ambition to go do something after work because they actually want to enjoy a little bit of life, well, that explains it. That exactly explains it. Whereas if you pivoted that model, and not to hijack your thought here, but I've worked from home for many, many years. And when I first left my job and quit, they hired me in as a consultant. And I used to get done, even before that, I always had Fridays working from home. I never worked a Friday because I do all my work. And eventually I did Thursdays and Fridays from home. I never worked a Thursday or a Friday. I do all my work on Monday and Tuesday. And then I just schedule my emails to go out on Thursday, Friday to make it look like I was doing something. Because when I was able to adjust my schedule and not just have to be present, I was able to just hyper focus on work. Again, I'm not saying that at-home model has been proven that people just take advantage of it. Screw you if you did that. But when you take away the BS, right, and you show that people, it's there's tons of studies out there. Like people work better in shorter sprints. Give them a 5-6 hour sprint 4 days a week. They'll rip through the work, rip through it because you're doing work. You're not just doing nonsense, busy crap to get by. And then that changes the model around because then all of a sudden your kids don't have to be locked up away somewhere. You have more time to enjoy it. They can do the things that they enjoy. The system changes.
Dude, look, I just to kind of second what you talked about working from home and giving people the flexibility to enjoy their life and get the work done at the same point in time. I am case in point, a success story in that regard. Right now, granted, my job is completely different from yours. I'm in sales and I've worked from home for, 2026? So just 5 years now, right?
Yep.
And the reason, because it worked from home, is because I started at the tail end of the 2020 era, we'll call it. I don't want to say the word because we'll get flagged. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
So I learned how to do this job remotely. I learned how to do this job from home, and I was very successful at it. And about 2 years ago, the company really made a big push to get everybody back out into the field. And I was like, no, not going to happen. I'm not going to put myself in a regimented schedule and your schedule because you think I need it when I've clearly proven that I don't need it. I'm very successful. I've kicked ass at this job for the past 5 years. And now I'm supposed to completely upend and uproot my life because you want me to go out in the field for what? It makes no sense at all in the slightest bit. I love the fact that I could work as hard as I want to and need to when I have to. And when I don't have to, I can go pick the kids up. I could start getting dinner ready. I could do this. Like sometimes I just go fishing because I have to live my life, right? And granted, I understand that can't be the case, right? A firefighter can't do that. Police officer can't do that, right? There, not every career has the ability to do that. And it really, at the end of the day, this isn't a work from home discussion, but it's more of the time and the freedom and the ability to be your own person that makes people more efficient.
So maybe the real conspiracy here, Mr. Phillips, is not that the education system is broken. It's that it's working exactly as it's intended. Producing workers instead of thinkers, compliance instead of curiosity. We've kind of hit on that topic a couple times tonight. Debt instead of independence. I mean, we've covered 1,000 topics before, right? Like where who runs the world, not them, but the banks typically. We've had 1,000 topics too about, psychological programs. We've talked at length about MK Ultra style programs. Why is this any different than any of those, right? Like I remember seeing something once before, like a meme that like your school system is very much modeled after a prison, like the same things, the giant cafeterias, like the concrete buildings, the hallways, the cloud. It's very much is. So,
My
once
high
you
school actually was designed to be a prison.
there you go. Even wilder.
The high
even
school that
wilder.
I went to before I moved to New Jersey was designed to be a prison, and then they
Yes.
went up using it as high school. So yeah,
Absolutely wild. And it's supposed to foster education with these walls painted white and people just sitting in these cold buildings, cold psychologically and generally temperature wise as well. Once you see it, as most things with this, it's always hard to see, but we would like to hear what each of you think. Are we out of our minds? Are we onto something here? Do you know something about the education side? Do you have a story to share about something that turned you off about it? Maybe you were an enthusiastic teacher at one point. You just kind of lost the flavor for it. You see it all the time now. So people look for new careers to escape it, or people that go into the tutoring business. We see that a lot too, where they're just disgusted by what happens in education and they think they can make a bigger difference by doing something outside of it. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. Leave a comment on Spotify. We always respond to those there. YouTube. We might get back on the Rumble one of these days if we stop getting bombarded by the spam stuff over there. X, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, we are there. Like us, follow, subscribe, conspiracyrealist.com, cocktailsconspiracy.com. Mr. Phillips, I am almost done with the standard over here.
your
Send
boy
us home.
is done.
Send us home with some parting words for the audience here. You always get some good wisdom.
I really don't. I really don't. I usually just come up with some mumbo jumbo that I spit out there. And that's what I'm going to do this time.
Okay. let's hear
Here's
it.
some mumbo jumbo. Goodbye.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, raise your glass to mystery. It's been another episode of Cocktails and Conspiracies.